Good morning. This is Ron. It is Monday, August the 6th, and welcome to Storytime. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America, because I'm the only one that makes the presumption for the status quo. Speaking to all you butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. And last Wednesday, Rush Limbaugh celebrated the 30th anniversary of his show. So he was saying that on his show about talking about how different that the show is and it's changed over the years. And the interesting thing about it was that he made it sound as though his show was uh, is where it is today because of some sort of a natural evolutionary type process. And that he claims that the show is better today than it was, say, 25 years ago. And so that's kind of a process, natural evolutionary process of improvement. And so then it is, reached the level it has today. But what's interesting is he doesn't talk at all about what really happened with his show. There's three parts to the Rush Limbaugh show. There is pre-addiction, addiction, and post-addiction. And I know that because I went through it. I used to listen to his show every day, not necessarily 3 hours a day, but I did listen to the show on a daily basis. And in the beginning, when I first listened to it, there was a lot of irreverence on the show. There was a lot of comedy. There was a lot of sarcasm. There was a lot of making fun of the left, using some of the weapons the left likes to use against the right, against themselves, against the right back at the left, using some of their own weapons against them. Let's put it that way. So then there got to a point where on his show where he started to get and seemed to take himself very, very seriously. He was angry. He was irritable. He was throwing temper tantrums on the air. And so then eventually we got to the point where he made the admission on the air that he had an addiction that he had to deal with. I think it was Oxycontin. And that he was addicted to Oxycontin. And that he's going to take 30 days off the air to deal, get the head start on dealing with his addiction and go from there. And then when he did come back, his show was never the same. And and again, his show during the addiction process was again very. There was a lot of it seemed a lot of frustration that he was expressing. He's sick and tired of this. He's sick and tired of that. People aren't listening to him. Yeah, 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 yeah. And also, he's going through the process of losing his hearing, and so he would come on the air, and he would make his voice deeper, and you could hear it. And people would call him up and confront him about it. Hey, what's wrong with your voice? And he would get mad and snippy at people, saying, "There's nothing wrong with my voice. It hasn't changed at all." Yeah, it did. He made it deeper. And come to find out, then he explained that he was going to have a cochlear implant and that he was losing his hearing. And so again, and then after he comes back from being in program for 30 days, and I assume he's still in program today. His show is completely different. There is very, very few segments that he used to have. He used to have various updates. So you'd have the feminist update with its feminist update theme, and then you had the environmental update, and this update, that update, the other thing. And so it was made the show a little bit more interesting in that again there was a little bit of relief from it wasn't just all editorials like it is today. Today he comes on, he does a monologue, and other than taking questions from from listeners, it's basically one long monologue. Uh, every once in a while, he'll go ahead and deign to do some kind of an update. There's also used to have much more. You'd hear much more from Paul Shanklin, who was a guy that was doing imitations, excellent imitations of various politicians. at the time. I think it was Bill Clinton that was president, but he was doing Bill Clinton and a whole bunch of others. And so again, there was a comedy component to it. So there was a certain you didn't get too intense. It lacked a lot of the intensity that his show has today. Now his show is much has much more intensity to it. Not quite as much as when he was in the throes of his addiction, but it still has a certain level of intensity to it. So there is that's what's been going on with this show, and I'm sure that what happened vis-a-vis the changes in his show came from changes to him, changes when he got addicted, and changes as he has gotten into recovery. And I hope that he is successful in his recovery and remains clean and sober for, or at least clean. I don't know. I think he does still have what he refers to as adult beverages from time to time, but that he remains clean and, beats his addiction in the long run. So, anyhow, yeah, that's the big changes that are in the Rush Limbaugh program. I overall, he is. I love to listen to Rush Limbaugh because he has one of the best voices in radio. He used to have the best voice in radio when he started, because one of the things that happened with the addiction and particularly with the loss of his hearing is his voice changed, and it is different today than it used to be back in the 90s before he lost his hearing. So it was one of the best voices in radio, and it's one of the reasons I still listen to him today. Is I love the sound of his voice. Glenn Beck are two of the best in terms of their voice quality. Sean Hannity, not so much, but Rush Limbaugh and Glenn Beck for sure. And I love listening to them for that reason. Is that I like listening to the quality of their voice. I don't always think that they are doing as good of a job as they should. But anyhow, Rush Limbaugh means well. I believe he is patriotic, but there's so much that he could do better. And so that's part of the purpose of my show, is to point that out to folks. Don't settle for less. If better is available, then we should be getting what's better. So when I come back, I'm going to read from Tammy Bruce's book, The Death of Right and Wrong. We're going to get a few more pages. It's a nice long chapter, but I'll only do a few pages of it. And then after that, it's going to be Philosophy According to House. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And yes, this is going to be The Death of Right and Wrong by Tammy Bruce. I love Tammy Bruce because she has the insights into the left in general, and more specifically feminism, and as a matter of fact, the gay or lesbian movements that Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity et al. Lack. And as a matter of fact, that I lack. I do have insights into the left because I grew up with lefties, similarly to David Horowitz. And but I did not become an active lefty as growing up. I immediately became a Reaganite in 1980 and went from there. So went from being a Reaganite to being a libertarian to studying some Ayn Rand, sort of an objectivist, not really. I mean, objectivism always kind of bothered me, but it eventually became an independent, and I'm still remained politically an independent to this day. So, but here we go. Tammy Bruce and the Death of Right and Wrong, and this section is called "The Importance of Red Flags," and basically she's talking about here is trials that have gone on, and how she had been talking about that, and how people had gotten away, in some cases literally gotten away with murder, and that is happening because of the cultural influences of the left. And now she's been talking about so-called art, and in which you're dealing with artists that are really engaged in absolute filth, She's put it in her book in explicit terms, and I won't repeat it because it's just so disgusting. So if you really want to know what kinds of art she's talking about, get a copy of her book and find out. Because, like I said, I'm just not going to get into that kind of depravity. I mean, it really is depraved. So anyhow, the importance of red flags. We have to remind ourselves that we are generations of Americans who do get it. We have seen tremendous changes in the last 40 years, and we have adapted where and when appropriate. Which means that when a red flag goes up, we should trust it with all our hearts. We're not facing the sort of dilemma presented in the 1960s, where, for example, many people who supported equal rights for blacks worried about the effects of an expansion of the federal government's power. No, this goes beyond the pale at every level of moral consciousness. These are no-brainers. Of course, the other tactic is to place assaults on our culture in a special interest group perspective. Yege, one of the artists in question, the moment his so-called art was challenged and started waving the gay banner. It's about pushing the notion of gay sex, pushing the notion of consent, pushing the notion of what's legal. We are living in the era of AIDS. This is about his responsibility, my responsibility. And that was a quote from Yege. This is when your red flag should go immediately up. The moment someone on the left waves the banner of gay rights or invokes AIDS and responsibility, it is intended to render your perspective moot. The disintegration of our culture and the conditioning of people into accepting it in silence begins with legitimizing the depraved. The tactic, once again, is to tell you that this is a culture of which you know nothing, and therefore you are not to come to judgment about it. I've seen that tactic succeed over and over again in my feminist work and in the gay community. It is the primary offensive defense, designed to shut objectors up while the obliteration of our culture rolls merrily along. It works because we want to be understanding. We want to be compassionate. That goodness is what is so easy for the left elite to manipulate and so easy for them to use against us, but only if we let them. So this section is outstanding because she's hitting all the buttons here. She's getting it right on so many levels here. One of the things that I want to bring up, though, is that is particularly good, is she says, we have adapted when and where appropriate. And that is what I'm talking about in terms of being a conservative, a true conservative that makes the presumption for the status quo. Part of what that means is that that I change when change is appropriate, when there's an obvious case for change. And that's exactly what she's talking about here. Changing when it is necessary. Let me see what else. Placing assaults on our culture in a special interest group perspective. Now, this whole thing with art started with a French artist. I wish I could remember the name of this guy. And what he did is he turned art from an intellectual situation, because that's always the way art had been looked at, was in terms of what constitutes art and fine art. Okay, because art, technically speaking, comes from the Greek word techne, which basically anything can be art. Anything you can make. You make a table, was considered art. So we make the distinction of fine arts, such as painting and playing music and whatnot, as different from making a table or whatever. But that the fine arts were an intellectual expression, and there was a French guy that came along, lefty, and he basically turned it into a power issue. And there was a particular art show, and he basically threw a temper tantrum and said, "Who are you to decide what it is that should be displayed in this show? That what kind of art should be displayed in the show?" And he went out and he bought a urinal. He went to a urinal manufacturer or whatever, bought a urinal, and he signed his name on the side of it and entered it. And I guess the fools at in this art show went ahead and accepted it. Is my best guess. And he was famous ever since. And it started a question that the people on the right, people that support art, have never answered. and that is the issue about whether or not art is a matter of power, or is it a matter of intellectual expression? And it is obviously a matter of intellectual expression. It is not a matter of power. Might doesn't make right, and the ends don't justify the means, period. And so, what this guy is doing, and we know Yegi is doing all this excrement type of quote art as an expression of power. And we know that because of what he says. Yegi, the moment his so called art was challenged, started waving the gay banner. Quote, it's about pushing the notion of gay sex, pushing the notion of consent, pushing the notion of what's legal. We are living in the era of AIDS. This is about his responsibility, my responsibility, unquote. No, not about responsibility, but about power, and the power that the left is talking about is the ability to operate with impunity. Real power is the authority necessary to meet one's responsibilities. But Yege is talking about acting with impunity and agitating ultimately for socialist revolution and socialist paradise, but in the meantime, going ahead and making this an expression of gay power. Um, that we are we quote unquote the gay community are forced to be reckoned with, and it's a chip on your shoulder type of thing. Chip on your shoulder meaning that's the way some people would used to start a fight. They would put a chip of wood on their shoulder, literally, and say, "I dare you to knock it off." And if you knock the chip off, then you're gonna get into a fight. And this is what he's doing. He's saying, I'm gonna do whatever the hell I want to do. I dare you to tell me otherwise. And people are scared and intimidated to say, go to hell. Okay? It's not art. You don't get to make it art just because you say so. I don't care if you're gay, straight, or anything in between, or bisexual, or whatever. It isn't so. And but that's what the right needs to do. Say if you want to poop all over yourself or do whatever else you're going to do, fine, but don't call it art because it isn't. Another classic example of that is the Democrat Party recently has attempted to change their name to the Democratic Party. I refuse to refer to them as the Democratic Party. Lots and lots of conservatives, so-called conservatives, do. They call it the Democratic Party. Democratic candidate, so and so. I heard it on TV the other day, or Democratic representative, or Democratic politician. Democrat is an adjective. It describes a noun. In some cases, a proper noun. If you're going to refer to, say, Joe Biden as a Democratic politician, you're describing him and his behavior, allegedly. And adjectives are not nouns. They're not proper nouns. They're not the names of things. Democrat is a name. Democratic is an adjective. And the Democrat Party has no power to change adjectives into nouns. But that's basically what they've done. They've said, we're going to use an adjective as a noun, and we dare you to say anything about it. Okay, I'm saying something about it. And I refuse to refer to the Democrats as anything else other than Democrats. Okay. But so that goes into the notion of, that goes back to identity politics, which we got a little bit of that from Kamala Harris recently, where she was making some kind of a nonsensical statement in regards to identity politics, and a statement that missed the point that identity politics is, again, about power. That's the whole idea of identity politics, where women's groups say, we women should define ourselves. We're not going to be what men say, or blacks saying we are going to decide what is black and not black, and white people have nothing to say about it. And it's BS. It's not a power issue. It's an issue of objectivity, an issue of reality. You are black or a woman because you meet certain objective criteria, period. But again, the people on the right that should be putting an end to that and saying, absolutely not, I'm not going to go for that, don't. They go meekly along because they're scared to death of their own shadows, because the left has no power. And let's see, as she said at the very end of this paragraph, only if we let them. Okay, the left elite to manipulate, it's so easy for them to use against us, but only if we let them. The left only has the power that conservatives give to them. Okay, you want to defeat lefties, it's very simple, very easy. Giving them power. It doesn't mean you have to get into arguments with them, but every time they come along and say, well, we're the Democratic Party, you just simply refuse to call it Democratic. You refer to them as what they are, Democrats. And a Democrat Party. Okay? Don't go along with it. You don't even need to argue about it. Because 99% of the time, there's nothing to argue about anyhow. It's inarguable. Let me see. The tactic, again, is to tell you that this is a culture of which you know nothing, and therefore you are not to come to judgment about it. Seen that tactic succeed over and over again in my feminist work and in the gay community is a primary offensive defense designed to shut objectors up while the obliteration of our culture rolls merrily along. And so that's one of the things. Understand that everything that the left is doing is about power, and now today, the past few decades, it's about psychological power, manipulating, bullying, and intimidating people psychologically, very often through the use of rhetorical devices, through the use of grammar, and whatnot. So, so when you realize that the Democrats are using psychological tools and techniques, they cease to be scary. They cease to scare you. Okay, you don't have to worry about them saying, "Well, here's a chip on my shoulder, dare you to knock it off." You just walk away. I have to worry about this person. This person is bluffing. This person is full of crap. And the Democrats and the lefties in general are exactly that. They want to bully, they want to intimidate. And again, ask yourself when you're hearing a lefty talk, not what are they saying, but what are they doing? Or what are they trying to do? That makes all the difference. Okay, so let's see where we at here. There it is. So next time, next week, there'll be a section called A Contradiction in Terms. But when I come back, I'm going to be reading a little bit more from Philosophy According to House. Good. Okay, thank you very much. And Philosophy According to House, I want to read this because I want to show that philosophy is, that all of life is foundational. You want to learn about things, then you learn them in kind of foundational ways, and understanding that there is something at the base, at the foundation of all other knowledge, and that's philosophy. And to show you how philosophy influences our culture and how our culture then influences our politics. So with House, let's see, where were we at here? Oh, about House and the way he treats his subordinates, and his attitudes. Also dealing with a particular philosopher, Sartre, and an existentialist philosopher who basically said that hell is other people. Another reason that Sartre contends that others inspire negative feelings has to do with the way they objectify us. While every individual is a composite of mind and body, Sartre believes that individuals identify more closely with their minds than with their bodies. While individuals tend to think of themselves more as agents than as objects, others serve as painful reminders that we are physical beings, bodies with properties. Through their looks and their verbal appraisals, people remind us, often painfully, that we're physical beings when they remark on our weight, comment on our height, or look disapprovingly at our clothes. We objectify people primarily because we do not and cannot experience their minds, but can only perceive and interact with them primarily as objects. And being an object is troubling because knowing that one is a concrete something clearly limits one's freedom to be or do anything, and it is characteristic form of human consciousness to resist any sort of confinement that it hasn't chosen. And the whole statement is just crap. Sartre is full of crap. Anyways, he's a lefty, and a lot of the lefty philosophers, what they did is they warp philosophy in order to justify and rationalize Marxism and post-Marxism. And basically, that's the same thing that Sartre's doing here. He says, we objectify people primarily because we do not cannot experience their minds. Bull. We objectify people and make judgments about people because we need to know every single day two things. First of all, what do? We ask ourselves that every day, hundreds of times every day. What do? Which way do I go? Stop, go, left, right. Do I punish? Do I not punish? On and on and on and on. Do I ask for a raise? Do I not ask for a raise? What do I do? And the other part of that is that we do it for protection. You don't go out and just trust everybody. You find out early when you're a child and you go out and you trust people, especially the first time you get burned. Somebody treats you like crap. You start to learn that in order to, you learn that in order to lessen pain, I need to learn about people. I need to make judgment calls. If I see a particular type of person, I know to what degree I can trust that individual, that this individual is going to be able to be helpful to me or be a threat to me. So if you got gangbangers, I'm not going to trust them with my wallet. I'm not going to trust them with very much at all. I'm going to yes, judge them based on their appearance, their tattoos, their attitudes, and whatnot. Not necessarily because I can experience their mind, although I can tell what they're thinking, and everybody can tell what each other's thinking by the way they act, what they're thinking, or the way they're feeling. A lot of people have done that in the past, where they say, "You don't know me. You don't know what I'm thinking. You don't know what I'm feeling." Yes, I do. And whenever you hear somebody on the left say that, "You don't know me. You don't know what I'm feeling." Yes, I do. And I can tell by the way you look, the way you act. You've become withdrawn, whatever the deal is. So don't let people, particularly your kids, play that game on you successfully, because you get into a lot of problems. You go down that road and you're lost. You end up with no connection with your children, no influence of your children whatsoever. And I think that's probably the point of the situation. Once again, House illustrates Sartre's theory. Our tendency to regard individuals as objects is most apparent in House's treatment of patients, particularly the patients at the clinic, because they do not suffer from the enigmatic sorts of illnesses that he treats in his lab. Such patients hold no allure for House. Consequently, he treats them like vermin. Forced by Dr. Cuddy to keep clinic hours, House does nothing to disguise his disdain for the common man, though Cuddy hopes that if House deals with enough people, he'll find some humanity. Patients simply serve as the means by which House can pursue his occupation. In the case of clinic patients, they are obstacles. To clear a return path to the haven of the diagnostics lab, House will lie to, sedate, and even prematurely discharge those run-of-the-mill patients. For example, in One Day, One Room, he goes so far as to offer money to one patient to forego treatment, and he prescribes another a drug that causes paralysis in order to control his screaming. When asked by Cuddy why he would administer a drug that only stops the latter patient's behavior but does not alleviate his pain, House responds nonchalantly, "Someone had to stop the screaming." For House, the patient was like an irritating car alarm that needed to be silenced. And so part of one of the things that I find interesting too is looking at how the author is dealing with House in a non-judgmental way. Everybody and everything has to be looked at in a judgmental way. We have values. The left pretends, it actually pretends that it has different values, but it doesn't. It's anti-value and tries to destroy the notion of values. That's why it's always saying, don't judge. When on the contrary, you must judge. You have no other option. It's automatic. But anyway, so he deals with House in this very clinical way. Well, House does this because it's like the left that always wants to say you don't understand, and the best response to that is no, you don't understand. Okay, and usually that comes in relation to making a value judgment. Well, this person is no good; they're a thief. Oh, but you don't understand. He's doing this to feed an addiction, or the people that are homeless that trespass and are using needles, to shoot heroin, to inject heroin, and leaving those needles around, and um, uh, pooping all over the place, and just creating a just general uh, filth and breaking the law. You're going to hear that from the left is you don't understand. No, how dare you? You don't understand. You don't understand, obviously, what trespassing is. You don't understand what decent behavior is. You don't understand about trying to, about caring for your fellow human beings. It's interesting because it's always the people that are responsible, those of us that are, that have true power, that exercise authority in order to meet our responsibilities, that are considered non-compassionate with regards to the homeless. But my question is, where's the homeless people's compassion? Why is there no compassion coming from them to to everyone else, to the people with property? Why do they have no compassion for the people that own property? Why do they have no compassion for themselves and for each other? Because they treat. There was an example in the news of a couple of homeless guys. One homeless guy, well, I guess it was three, got beat up by another homeless man. The third homeless man, which was homeless man number two's friend, let's say we have 100, homeless man one, two, and three. One beats up two. Okay, number three is the friend of homeless man number two. Okay, homeless man number three starts laughing at homeless man number two. Homeless man number two takes a knife and stabs his friend to death. Does that sound compassionate to you? Sure doesn't sound compassionate to me. So again, where's the compassion? Compassion, it needs to be a universal quality, not just one for the rich. And by the way, lest you think that the rich means you got to be Bill Gates. In Venezuela, when Venezuela first started becoming communist, there was a news story about a man that had gotten cash from the bank to pay his employees, and he was killed, murdered for the money because he was considered rich. And basically, what it comes down to with communism or any other of these isms that are against the rich is relative. If you make more money than your neighbor, guess what? You're rich. And so that since the whole philosophy is based on the malevolent universe premise, if you're rich, i.e., successful, then you must have cheated, gotten lucky, or a combination of the two. Therefore, you are to be treated with contempt and very possibly violence. So, um, that's what the deal is with being rich. So, it doesn't mean you shouldn't be rich, but just don't buy into this idea, the notion that you hear from the left all the time about rich people. And next time you hear, well, the rich need to pay their fair share, or just any type of general contempt about the rich, remember that's where it comes from. And that one of the simple responses is success is to be expected. You can, maybe you're not rich today, but I plan on being rich, because success is to be expected. And so the question isn't why are you rich? The question is why aren't the homeless people? Why haven't they gotten off their duffs and gotten something done? That again, when you're looking at homelessness, that's another the reason that there's so much, quote, compassion for or worrying about the homeless is because they're considered to be, in a way, a role model because um, the left says that the universe conspires against us and failure is to be expected, so that it is the homeless that are truly blameless because they have no property, they have no success whatsoever. So therefore, they're truly blameless. The people, everybody else, to one degree or another, should be looked at with contempt in various ways, shapes, or forms, uh, because again, they were successful because they cheated, they got lucky, or a combination of the two. And again, that's why they should be looked at with contempt and be forced to, quote, give back, unquote. That's where that phrase comes from. If you've cheated or gotten lucky, then yes, you should give back. But if you earned your success, you earned your money, no. So, let me see, here we go. Sartre's last reason that others compel feelings of antagonism is that they rob the individual of her sense of primacy and control. As we all know, other people do not necessarily do what we want. They have their own agendas. They also do not necessarily share in our beliefs or our sense of what is important. Indeed, they may see the world in a radically different way than we do, and they normally resist our efforts to turn them to our advantage. We don't like this. Sartre uses several graphic images to illustrate the impact that the appearance of other consciousness has on our psyche, on the psyche of the individual. Using a medical metaphor, he asserts that the presence of others creates a hemorrhage in the individual's world, a fissure that causes the world that the individual knows to disintegrate. Similarly, he describes the other as the drain hole through which the individual's sense of the world and sense of security are lost. So again, and so much of this is what a lot of left-wing philosophers come up with is just absolute gibberish, and is designed to confuse. And if they throw in some big words and whatnot, they can successfully intimidate people into thinking, well, if I don't understand it, it must be because I'm stupid. No, more than likely, if you don't understand it, it's because the author is stupid, or the author is a con artist. The author is trying to put something over on you. So Ayn Rand, one of the best things she ever said was, trust yourself. If there's something that when you're reading something and there's a little voice inside you that says something's not right here, it probably isn't. Don't dismiss that. Don't say, well, I'm not published. Who am I to say I'm not published? Or I don't know, I don't have a PhD or a master's degree. No, don't do that. If there's something about what anybody says, me or anyone else says, that bothers you, find out why. Now, if you come to find out it's because you misunderstood or because you didn't understand the meaning of a word, whatever, you misunderstood, fine. Then you've learned something. But you'll be surprised how often that it is you that is in the right and it is the author, the person you're listening to, that is wrong. So, on that note, we'll go ahead and conclude another episode of Storytime. And until next time, thank you very much for joining me and have a great day.